Hello, welcome to Cultic Cube, where we cube religiously. Today we'll discuss the Ixalan block double-faced cards. I'll defend those that I think you should try running, and I'll attack those that I believe to be traps. Ultimately, I will argue that you should consider breaking with Magic convention in order to run some of these cards pre-flipped to their backside. There are 17 total double-faced cards, or DFC, in Ixalan block, and we will discuss 10 of these in more or less rigorous detail. Each of these DFC is a land on its backside, while the front faces differ in type, though they are most often enchantments. Some of these are actively good at most power levels, some are best suited to lower power environments, or are role players for particular strategies. Some are traps, and some of them are pretty obviously bad. I'll generally avoid talking about the last category entirely. I'll begin by talking about the cards that I think are best run as normal DFC. Then, I'll attempt to convince you to throw caution and the rules of Magic to the wind by running some of these cards for their back face only. The too long didn't watch version is, if I had to pick just one card to run in normal mode, and one card to run pre-flipped, those would be Search for Azcanta and Conqueror's Foothold, which is the back of Conqueror's Galleon. Good cards to run in normal mode. Search for Azcanta costs a mere 2 mana, and it improves the quality of your draws substantially. If you have played with an effect that allows you to scry every turn, such as Thassa, God of the Sea, Sigiled Starfish, or Lifecrafter's Bestiary, then you know how quietly powerful this effect is. Search for Azcanta does one better than scry, though. It surveils, as Guilds of Ravnica calls this effect, for instance on the card Sinister Sabotage. This has positive interactions with Flashback, see Snapcaster Mage, Delve, Dig Through Time, Dredge, Golgari Cave Troll, and potentially Reanimator strategies. And it is best friends with Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. In my experience, it is not too onerous to flip the card. Given the content of the card's backside, one is liable to want to play it in a spell-heavy deck, often blue-red, which will find many opportunities to fill the yard quickly with cheap cantrips, such as Preordain, Counter Magic, Counterspell, and Interaction, like Lightning Bolt. Also, the card is not a terrible late draw, as here you likely lose out on the Surveil value, but you presumably get to flip the card quite quickly. And on the backside, the card is insane. You get to create an Augur of Bolas at will for 4 effective mana, except that this is still better in that it finds a broader swath of card types, and it digs as deep as Impulse. If you are anywhere near a stable position in the game when you flip Search, you will likely very quickly bury your opponent in card advantage, and card quality. Search is similar to Sylvan Library. I think Search is worse on average, but I have had conversations with other thoughtful cubers who believe differently, and I can accept that people of goodwill may disagree on this point. But regardless, I have found that while Search is a great card and is worth trying in any environment, its value falls off the higher the surrounding power level is. I doubt that the card makes the grade in Vintage Cube, and I would not call it an auto-include in a fully powered-up Legacy Cube. Legion's Landing is, I think, the next best of these DFC in a vacuum. Its effect looks modest. It gives you a trained Caracol. I was not interested in a new Kildoran outpost when I first read the card, and I don't believe that it made many early waves in the Cube community. But Usman Jamil, co-host of the venerable Cube podcast The Third Power, gave it respectable marks in his Ixalan written review, to which I provide a link in the video description. I found that Legion's Landing is sneakily good. It is generally not too hard to flip the card in an aggressive deck. The condition is the same as that of Kythian, Hero of Akros. On the backside, Adanto the First Fort gives you a reliable way to continue building out your board, and it provides built-in Wrath insurance. The tokens play well with Anthem effects, such as Intangible Virtue, Mass Pump effects, as in the Battle Cry on Hero of Bladehold, token synergies, Tasia Karlov, and aggro stack strategies, Braid's Cabal Minion. In aggro mirrors, the lifelink is not irrelevant, as padding your life total even a bit can make it very difficult for your opponent to race you. Also in decks that run thin land margins, the ramp effect can sometimes surprise one by proving relevant. I like this card quite a bit, especially as an enabler for tokens or aristocrat-style decks, though I will say that White Weenie would often prefer a Savannah Lions, all things being equal. That is, this card is in a slightly odd spot of wanting to go in aggro decks, and yet also wanting its deck to find some ways of synergizing with it. I recommend testing this card anywhere below vintage power level. It is not a card with a great deal of raw power or efficiency, but the sum of its parts may well surprise you. On to some cards that I think are better as role players, or are most functional at lower power levels. Treasure Map is a divisive card. I have heard from multiple people, whose opinions I respect, that the card is good in cube, but I simply do not share that view. I have tested the card at both legacy and modern power levels, and it performed poorly in both environments. The card is very slow, a glacial ancestral recall. It is also one of those fiddly cards, Druidic Satchel might be another example, that can seduce you into believing that you are getting more value out of it than you actually are because the card demands so much of your attention. Tapping it each turn, putting special counters on it, flipping it, etc. In an ideal world, this card would make use of other treasure support, such as Vraska Relic Seeker. In the end, I can only recommend this card in environments that run at approximately modern power level or lower. Growing Rites of Itlimoc flips into an upgraded Gaia's Cradle, which is a powerful effect. Cradle's utility generally goes down the later in the game it is played, so this card having a front side with some hoops to jump through before flipping definitely puts a cap on its power level. How powerful is the front side? Well, not very. It is substantially worse than both Commune with Nature, as well as Lead the Stampede, and neither of these are hot cube cards anyway. If you do want this effect, you want it to be much more efficient, such as Oath of Nissa, or you want to be able to grind more value from the effect with something like Duskwatch Recruiter. I do not think Growing Rites is very good, and I'd only run it at pretty low power level, though here I'd be worried that the backside would be too powerful for the environment. Hadana's Climb is one that was recommended to me for testing by Brad and Eric of the Cube podcast Solely Singleton, which is linked below. I ran it in an environment that was roughly modern power level, and that included counters support, in the form of things such as Hardened Scales, Winding Constrictor, and Colonian Hydra. The card was a lot of fun there, especially when it did things like put counters on Master Biomancer. As you can imagine, though, this adds up to incremental advantage, and the strategy is quite soft to sweepers. The backside of the card is pretty insane. Winged Temple of Orazka is, on average, better than Kessig Wolfrun, and it closes games quite quickly. In short, Hadana's Climb is awful without support, but if you are into +1/+1 counters, then by all means give this a go. I want to warn you off Vance's Blasting Cannons, which I consider to be a trap. It's a card that I've seen people try to make work, as the upside of eventually getting to throw around lightning bolts like Zeus is so strong, but the condition of casting 3 spells in a turn is not trivial in limited Magic, not even in Cube. People have tried to sell me on the card by comparing its flip condition to that of Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. I am not persuaded by this argument. First, I doubt the premise that flip Chandra is good in Cube. Second, Chandra only requires that 2 spells be cast, which is, it turns out, many fewer than 3. Blasting Cannons is not a card that I would ever consider running pre-flipped either, as that would be insanely strong and extremely difficult for the opponent to interact with. It would represent a substantial upgrade to Sulfuric Vortex, which is already quite powerful. In short, I would give this card a hard pass. I want to argue now for running some of these cards pre-flipped, such that they are drafted and played with the backside always up, as if they were simply utility lands like any other. Of course, one may have objections, rooted, for instance, in aversion to playing the cards in ways other than Wizards intended, or in fear of confusing one's players, especially if one also runs DFC in normal mode. But if you would, suspend these objections for a moment, or imagine them to be soluble. Allow me to strongly recommend to you Conqueror's Foothold, which is the back of Conqueror's Galleon. Discord colleague and frequent MTG Cube subreddit contributor Fleischdog recommended running this card flipped to me, and he published an article about it on the subreddit as well, which I link in the video description. The card is excellent. Best of the Ixalan DFC for Cube when run in this way. It is amazing in Reanimator, where it is an extremely resilient merfolk looter that is much easier to activate than Desolate Lighthouse, for instance. Control decks love the card, as it loots early, and later functions as an Azure Mage that does not die. It is also a great place to dump mana when in a ramp deck, generating otherwise elusive card advantage for green. It can be cute with Sneak Attack and Through the Breach, though this is not much of a selling point, as you hope to have won the game before getting into recursive loops of regrowing creatures only to be snuck in again. Conqueror's Foothold is quite strong, but I have not found it to be broken at Legacy or even at Modern power level. An aggro deck will put you on a clock that will prevent you from fiddling too much with Foothold. It is quite a tempo commitment to use the abilities, as the loot costs an effective 3 mana, the draw costs 5, and the regrowth costs 7. That's a lot of utility in one package, but it isn't free, and you can only activate it once per turn cycle thanks to the tap requirement. I cannot imagine running the card on its front side, as the vehicle with the expensive crew requirement, but on the back side, the card is a solid A in my book. I highly recommend giving it a try, at any size and power level. Temple of Aclazotz is another card that is conditionally worth testing pre-flipped. The transform condition is ridiculous, but the backside is a perfectly reasonable effect. In its base use case, it allows you to get some value out of creatures that are about to die anyway. But obviously the card's value goes way up if you are in an Aristocrats deck, as Temple provides you with a reliable repeated sacrifice outlet that turns on your Blood Artist or Grave Pact. And as Temple natively taps for black, there is not a huge cost to putting it in the deck that wants to play swamps anyway. If you support Aristocrats, I highly recommend running this card. And even if you do not, if you can find room for the card in your cube, you will probably find something to do with it. Finally, I will talk about the cards that flip into alternate versions of iconic effects: Growing Rites of Itlimoc, Storm the Vault, and Thematic Compass. These cards are all a fraction of the hard currency cost of their forebearers, so they are worth considering running pre-flipped as budget-friendly alternatives. I am personally running Vault of Catlacan at the moment. I have eroded the card to say that it taps for colorless mana in the first mode. I wanted there to be some cost to running the card, though even with this restriction, it is still a strict upgrade to Tolarian Academy, of course. Thus far, Vault has not felt substantially more broken than Academy already is. I appreciate these cards as relatively inexpensive alternatives to cards that are otherwise quite pricey. I would not run Storm the Vault on its front face, as getting to 5 artifacts is too steep a cost, and Thematic Compass's front face does very little, apart from shuffling your library. Here are the remainder of the Ixalan block DFC which I have not touched on. I do not want to spend time on these, so I offer for your consideration thumbnail descriptions of why I would not consider running these, either as normal or pre-flipped. Pause the video now if you would like to examine these cards further. Thanks for hanging out. If you enjoy this content, please like this video and subscribe to the Cultic Cube channel. Check the video description for links to all the resources mentioned in the video. I've also provided links to a number of fora for Cube discussion. I can be found regularly on the Cube Discord and irregularly on the other sites. Let's chat Cube!